Welcome back to the Lift Free and Diet Hard podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Coates. Join me along with industry leaders and friends on a quest to get more people through the gym door and eating and living healthier. Join me where evidence meets empathy while rejecting fitness industry fads and extremism. Let's begin. Dr. Alyssa Olenick, I am so glad to have you back. You are a hard get for podcasts because you're working on so many cool things in all of your work. So it's great to have you. For those who are not super familiar, amongst all the other career accomplishments, you are a PhD of exercise physiology, which gives you tremendous authority to talk about what we're going to dive into next.
I actually don't even know what we're talking about today, Andrew. I'm not going to lie. You just asked and I said, yeah, friend, let's do it.
I rarely let my guests know what's going on because when I'm a guest on a podcast, I want to go in blind. So I actually changed this moments ago because I just saw what you posted today pop up. This one's fun, going in hot. Quote that you pulled from somewhere. I stopped training like a man and look what happened to my body, end quote. And you said, no, you stopped doing high intensity interval training. Hot take, most women would be better off if they trained like men. All right, got to explain this one.
Yeah. So if you scroll any sort of female phys algorithm out there is 101 videos that say, I stopped training like a man and look what happened to me. But I'm sure you know, as much as any other coach who's worked with women knows, women are not training like men. They are training the way the fitness, diet, 90s culture, early 2000s boom and bust industry sold them how to train. And so now there's this whole narrative of, well, women are training like men and they're left out of science and that's why they're not getting results. And no exercise science study ever has told women to do 6 days a week of boot camp paired with skipping breakfast and a whiff of air for lunch. And you know what I mean? Like burning endless calories on the cardio machines for thinness type. That is what women are doing. And they're not historically strength training. I know that it seems like a lot of women are strength training now because it's really popular, but statistically, women are not meeting the complete exercise guidelines, especially compared to men or in general. So I feel like there's this narrative of like, oh, I started training like a woman and look, but like in reality, they started doing structured strength training. They pulled back the obsessive intensity training all the time. Intensity isn't bad. If you guys go back and listen to my first podcast on zones and cardio with Andrew, I'm not anti-intensity, but it needs to be programmed appropriately. And so really it's the contrary. If women train more like men and the classic like strength training focused on like strength building and muscle hypertrophy, bro splits, powerlifting splits, whatever that looks like more tried and true classic strength training, not your high rep, high volume boot camp class lifting, mixed with intentional strategic cardio and then mobility, flexibility. If you like Pilates, yoga, women always think that when I say that, like you can't do those things, like absolutely do that stuff. They would get a lot more results. I even made the joke the other day, like I said, stop training like a man, start training like an ex-high school football player. Because I was doing power and plyometrics and strength training and cardio. And like, these are the foundations of health, fitness, athleticism, performance, all of these things. And women are not historically training that way. So that's my hot take. There you have it.
I'll interrupt this episode for a quick but important side quest. While I don't think everybody needs to track nutrition all the time, tracking is one of the most powerful tools to make sure you're not eating too much or too little. And MacrosFirst is my go-to app for me and my clients. MacrosFirst has a free barcode scanner, and a premium version comes with a bunch of cool stuff to make managing your nutrition easier. Like one, AI search. AI's everywhere now, where you can speak or type the foods you wish to save and log everything without having to search for each individual ingredient. 2, import recipes from a website. Save time creating recipes manually by importing all ingredients and instructions from your favorite recipe websites. No more searching for each ingredient one by one, just paste in the website. And 3, this one's a big one for nutrition coaches. Follow unlimited friends so you can follow all your clients. And there's a lot more cool features. You can try the premium version of MacrosFirst free for 14 days. Just download MacrosFirst from the App Store. And during setup, you'll be asked, how did you hear about us? Type in the code, Andrew. I love it. I mean, if I think about it, I mean, certainly half the people I work with are women. And the way that I program for women, I mean, first of all, any individual, I bias towards their individual preferences. And there are some self-selection biases. We hear about how women tend to like training lower body a bit more than men. Men anecdotally like to train upper body a little bit more. But it's not like there's massive differences in the way that we're approaching progressive overload. It's fundamentally the same approach.
Yeah, men and women, I always like to say we're are different sex, not a different species,
Mm.
right? It's not like women are magically not responding to mechanical tension, but a preference, a social psycho, whatever preference might be, I'm going to do more of this on my glutes than my chest, right? But like I did bench today. It's not like I can't do it, right? Kind of thing. So, yeah, exactly. The fundamentals of how we respond to strength or cardio still are there. Then you can look at preference, right? If a woman doesn't want to have ginormous Arnold Schwarzenegger biceps, like that's okay. But that doesn't mean they can't do that if they don't want to.
And you alluded to a bunch of stuff, and I'll just throw out that I also had Dr. Lauren Colenso Semple on not terribly long ago, and we did a lot to debunk a lot of these claims that are being made by popular, figures on podcasts. Actually, I guess we could probably go right into one of those. Uh,
Yeah.
Do women or anyone have any reason to fear cortisol spikes from higher intensity training? Because you just said, that they have to be a little careful about just this high intensity interval training all the time.
Yeah. You know what's funny is I was just reading up about some of this like stress rate impact on the HPA and HPO axis and stuff this morning, conveniently. And I was thinking about how I think if we preface some of these debunk things a little bit more with understanding where they come from, it might gain more clarity. And this was me even critiquing my own approach, like not anyone else. Just I was thinking, I was like, oh, well, maybe we need to give this context of where this claim comes from a little bit better. I had this in my comments the other day too. So there is like an impact and influence of stress on these axes that regulate your hormones and or how they're produced or their suppression or things like that. And so that's where a lot of these claims come from, because if you have a lot of psychosocial stress or stress from like over exercising and under eating on your body, that will negatively influence your hormones, and you could have things like missing your menstrual cycle or menstrual cycle irregularities, and things like that. So there is a grain of truth that high excessive stress can negatively influence hormones and all that stuff in their body. That isn't false. However, me, the nuance queen, the stress response to exercise is necessary. It's also adaptable. You cannot avoid it entirely at all for exercise, especially endurance or cardiovascular exercise, because you need that. Because people think just cortisol, but it's not just cortisol. It's also adrenaline or norepinephrine and epinephrine that are being released. And that also signals to things in your bodies to break down fats, break down carbs, deliver those to the tissues that are metabolically active so that you can fuel the activity that you're doing. And so it is necessary. However, the first time you do something really stressful and hard, you're going to have a heightened response to that. Then as you keep doing the exercise training, you are going to adapt, and that stress at the same, if you did like the same workout week after week after week and you never progressed it, eventually the stress response that would be lower because you would adapt. All exercise is your body going, whoa, what is this? I don't want this to feel as hard next time. Let's get fitter. So we're not feeling that stress, that disruption to homeostasis, and adapt, right? But over time, that stress is adaptable. So it's not as big and significant time after time after time. Or it's also based off relative intensity, fitness status, all of those things. And so we need stress to adapt to exercise. You're not going to adapt to exercise without any stress. Stress isn't always bad. Now, uncontrolled, chronic, unmanaged, or more than you can handle, like your bucket overflows and fills, is where that becomes an issue. And so it's not that one. Yes, excessive stress can have a negative impact on hormones. Where that's coming from can be multiple places. That can be lifestyle, that can be exercise, that can be nutrition, that can be whatever else is going on in your life, a really traumatic event, all of these things. And also, exercise is stressful, and that is why we adapt to it. It needs to be. It's not inherently bad. That stress response is adaptable and or reduced over time, but it is related to intensity. So a lower intensity, long duration bout of exercise might not have the same stress response in your body because it's not as hard as a higher intensity session. Does that make one better or worse? No, but we need to think about it when we're programming or doing the things that we're doing. This is my favorite fact I always like to add in here. For women, especially, your stress response to a long run or a long duration event of cardio or cardio in general will be less if your blood glucose is stable, which comes from eating enough before or during or in general. So being underfed is a stressor too, right? And women hate hearing that because they love to undereat. But being fed reduces the stress response of these things, because remember, the stress response is also signaling glucose, carbs, fats. Hey, I need you here and here. But if that's available in your body, it doesn't have to work as hard to get those, and or tell your body, hey, we don't have enough blood sugar, we need more, kind of thing. So that's always like my little caveat thing there is like, if you eat enough, if you're so worried about the stress of it, make sure you're eating enough, kind of thing. But then the stress response to that isn't bad. The issue is when we are doing more than we can recover from, more than we can handle, or more than is necessary for our full week of training. Again, I'm going to refer back to our original episode because I don't remember exact conversation, but I really think we really unpacked there the nuances of like how much cardio you do each week will dictate like how much of that intensity is too much versus doesn't really matter as much, kind of thing. So like go back and listen to that. But it's all relative, and it's not inherently bad on its own. It's only a problem when you're, one, not eating enough to support it, two, unable to recover from it, or three, it's more than you can handle and recover from in a total week of training, or not balanced out with other modes of training or other intensities of training. Hopefully that, like, I took you guys on my whole timeline of nuance there to help people. I want people to understand why we say the things that we do, right?
And can fill in more gaps, because a lot of these episodes I've been trying to have almost theme-based episodes that are master classes on certain topics. So as you alluded to, and I can't remember the exact number, it's somewhere in the 319 to 324, because it's one of the first episodes of a revamped approach to this. So please guys go back to that. And I also had Dr. Sue Kleiner, who is a god of performance nutrition. And we talked a lot about what you said, which is, adequate fueling for performance. So there's a masterclass on that as well. If you guys message me, I will pick it up and I will send it to you. Okay. So quote, are they selling you women's based training, or are they selling you a women's based hypothesis? I think you alluded to this earlier, but let's take it further. What's going on here?
Yeah. So unfortunately, so many of the claims that you see in like cycle syncy, hormone chaos, TikTok, or wherever you want to call it, are things that sound good in theory, right? They're things that we're like, okay, well, the body is reactive to stress, and stress is a negative reaction to hormones if overdone. So therefore, well, we shouldn't do exercise that spikes cortisol, because then that might decrease progesterone, and that might hurt hormones, and women shouldn't do that. So they take these big, like, that's just one example of many, but they take these leaps and bounds of all of these different things to come to this conclusion of something that has never been studied, tested, and shown. Now, does that mean that like we might not someday figure out some of these nuances? Potentially, right? With the current state of menstrual cycle literature, I think a lot of stuff's a lot more cute than people want to pretend like it is. But what they do is they take these extrapolations of like, well, this we know kind of over here, so it must be true over here, so therefore do this. And so much of hormone-based training is really extrapolated from these hormonal hypotheses, or just like mouse model stuff that we're assuming becomes true in humans or doesn't align with what we know. And so again, that doesn't mean there's not like tiny grains of truth to these things, but I think the magnitude is so much less, or the application depends on how much that effect is like an issue. So much of that stuff is just, they're just selling you a hypothesis of what we think or they think might be happening based off like hormonal interactions, but it's not anything that we have seen or shown or data on in exercise in women that is like an absolute truth. And so that's where I kind of have this. I'm like, they're selling you a hormonal hypothesis, right? They're jumping and connecting. They're connecting things that's good. That's good as a scientist, as a PhD student. That's what I did. I took these 4 different things. I had a map in my lab where I connected these like 4 or 5 different fields to answer this question that I had. That isn't bad thinking. You're not bad for trying to connect those things. But then does the data support that connection that we do have? Or does data even say that at all? I'm totally fine with people saying like, hey, this might happen, or maybe, or potentially, or we thought this, right? But that doesn't mean that that's like an absolute truth, but women are getting sold that as an absolute truth.
A quick sponsor break for my current aspiring coach listeners. This episode is brought to you by Train Heroic. If you know me, you know I only work with sponsors I use personally and where I know the people behind the product. Train Heroic is the best online coaching software in the industry. Not only is it a great platform for one-on-one coaching, it's fantastic for group coaching and selling standalone programs. Train Heroic is used by some of my trusted friends, so I switched my online group program here, and my members love it, raving about its ease of use. Having a dedicated app means far greater reliability for my clients and has been by far my best experience with any online coaching software. Train Heroic is a proven and stable industry leader, meaning it isn't going to suddenly disappear. One of the biggest risks in choosing an online coaching software. When you start a free trial today, you'll get 90 days free to experience why I love and trust this platform. You'll get full support from their team, who've been a joy for me to work with. And I trust Train Heroic and the people behind it. Here's how to activate your free 90-day trial. It's 2 important steps. Number 1, go to www.trainheroic.com/liftfree. Step 2, reply to the email you get. It should be trials@trainheroic.com, and let them know I sent you, or go to the links in the show notes. Do women want to hear that they're special and different from men? And is that why this type of messaging, both we get a lot of it from certain type of figures in the space, and why it's popular?
Yeah. I actually have a great podcast guest for you to talk about this, and I'll give you them after. She's doing like more like social psychology type stuff and why people believe influencers and false information. She could talk about this a lot more. I'll give you her. But women feel really left out and unheard of and unlistened to and ignored by doctors, by medical systems. They don't feel like they ever learned anything about their bodies. They don't know any of these things. So then when somebody starts talking to them directly, and it confirms the bias that they have of their perception of what's going on, they listen because it feels like somebody is saying the thing that they're thinking. That's what goes viral on the internet. Someone says the thing out loud that you're thinking or you want to be true, or feels like, oh, this explains what's going on, right? And so people believe and listen to that because, on the contrary, medical professionals, this is not me shading literally anyone specifically. This is just like a theme in general. This is like, I'm not thinking of anyone in my head. I just always want people to know that. Are being like almost talking down at people like, no, that's stupid. Ignore that. That's not true. Like they feel like they're still being dismissed because we're like, the governing bodies aren't saying this and blah, 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 blah. Like you have to talk to people like an influencer, honestly, if you want them to listen to you. Like you have to communicate in a style that they're receptive to, versus like that very like academic, like I come from that world, like, well, you know what I mean? And they feel like they're being dismissed again. So they're not receptive to that information. So when, I don't know, Holly, the hormone coach, comes around and talks to them in a way that like they resonate with and feels real to them, they think, oh, somebody finally is explaining what I'm going through. Oh, I feel like I'm not being dismissed. I'm being heard. And I really think I say this because coaches need to be cognizant of this language. This is, again, not a critique on anyone specifically. It's something that I've just had to learn myself in this. If anything, it's a critique on me. And from learning from the Emily, who I'm going to tell you to have on here, because that's why women are, they want this, and they do. I think they do. They want this women-specific stuff. They want to feel like there's something about them that's unique. They feel like they've been left out and ignored, and it paints this beautiful picture of like sports science and health has left you out. But here I am with all this magical information that sports science and health hasn't researched, but we have and know. So therefore, we're like, that's where the hypotheses thing comes in, right? Like they're like, science has ignored you for years, but then it's like, we're going to quote science that we've made up on how you should do X, Y, and Z and live your life. But it's the way that they frame it and do it. And so there's a mix of that. This dismissal for medical systems women feel their whole life, never feeling like they learned anything about their bodies, and then feeling like they don't understand what's going on and wanting to understand it. And then someone speaks to them in a language they identify with based off symptoms or experiences or whatever they're having, whether that's menstrual cycle, menopause, or whatever. And then they cling to that because they're like, oh, somebody's finally talking to me. So there's like, I think this whole process of things that are going on there. And yeah, I do think women want stuff that feels unique to them because they feel like they don't feel like anything ever has been. And so it's a really plausible story that all of this stuff should be sex specific. Why isn't it sex specific? And then when it's not, I think this is why I and probably Lauren and other people in this industry get a lot of pushback is that when we say, hey, the data doesn't really make it seem that sexy about being sex specific, people are mad because they want it to be. They want to be told the story that it's different. They want that to be the truth and reality because they're so bought into that, or it feels so plausible to them. So yeah, I think there's a few things going on there that is like dictating this, mixed with just really poor health literacy across the board.
Are there any meaningful differences, like things you can turn around and say, here, women, this stuff actually matters physiologically. So that way they can take this and go, this is actually a little different or a lot different from the way that men need to train or approach their nutrition or anything.
I think the biggest thing that gets overlooked so often is that there aren't the Venn diagram between men and women and how they should train and the differences between that overlaps so much because of individual response and individual starting places and individual fitness level. Like, I really don't think, because let's start with sex differences, for example. People love to tote women have more type 1 fibers and they're better at recovery and they're better at cardio and they have better fat metabolism and they're this and that and blah, blah, blah. But an untrained woman doesn't naturally have amazing fat metabolism or amazing endurance. She's still detrained. We still see a training response and difference in that. That's literally what my dissertation was. So like, that's not just, that's the literature, but also like I've seen this pattern in other studies. It's not like you're born a woman, so great, amazing. You have this fantastic advantage. Now, in general, across the board on average, when you're premenopausal, women do have an advantage of having like lower metabolic disease risk because of this hormonal state compared to men. And then that flips postmenopausal when the hormone shifts. So there is that slight advantage there, right, from that. But that doesn't necessarily change the way that we train. And there might be some differences then, like men might have more type 2 muscle fibers. They might be more powerful. So therefore, people say that women need more intensity to make up for that. And men need more endurance stuff to balance that out. And so there might be a little bit of truth there. But my takeaway from that is women should include some intensity into their training. It is beneficial. So you're recruiting and training type 2 muscle fibers. But also, men should too, and so should anyone that's aging. So that's where the message gets murky. You're like, yeah, that isn't bad, and it could be painted as woman-specific advice, but it's really not advice that's different than you'd give an aging male kind of thing either, right? Or any human or individual. And there's also going to be like huge genetic differences in these variances too. So I really think people severely underestimate how much baseline fitness status influences so many things over like sex differences, like to the point that this is a tangent. I think more studies that are done on sex differences or on women need to be controlling for fitness status. In my dissertation, we found differences based on fitness status, not menstrual cycle. And I'm sure that that's a trend in a lot of places. Now that was metabolism, but that makes sense, right? Like, because fitness status directly influences your muscle fiber composition, your mitochondrial composition, your muscle density, your muscle power output, your metabolism. Like, fitness status largely influences those. So that's why you also have to think about like the person that you're coaching, because my detrained postmenopausal mother isn't going to be able to do the same things as me as a premenopausal, highly trained woman. But my dad, who's a highly trained man at 60 something, could probably do a lot of the things that I do, right? So there's this like murky nuance and overlaps. That Venn diagram is looking a lot more like a circle, other than maybe a few things here and there to the side. So there might be little things like, and I say this huge caveats, maybe women recover faster between heavy strength sets or high intensity intervals because they're more oxidative. So they might need less rest time. But a detrained woman is going to need more rest time because she's going to have her ass kicked. Maybe women might be able to handle more volume because they are less fatigable, or they're essentially working at a relatively less efficient percentage of their 1 rep max. So they can like do more reps, but they'd fatigue easier at higher rep stuff. And this is kind of shown in literature, but also kind of theoretical kind of thing. So maybe, but also a really high trained lifting resistance trained woman with a good endurance base is also going to have that advantage over a detrained woman or a detrained man, right? So like, again, there's this murkiness here of like, well, then it comes back, then all these holes poke through it. It's like, well, let's coach the person in front of us. Like, let's where they're at. And so there's two different thinking thoughts that I think people get really hung up on. There's sex differences, and then there's hormonal impacts of training, and people lump them together all of the time. There's what is the baseline sex differences? And yes, we have those. They do exist. Women aren't men, right? But again, we're not a different species. But do those sex differences cause us to make meaningfully different choices in the people that we're coaching? And not really. They really don't. They might be there. It's true. Women are more oxidative and more type 1 fiber dominant and or potentially have better fat oxidation, all these things, give or take on average, right? With individual variability overlapping. But that doesn't really largely change the way we train people because they also respond to resistance training protocols the same as men. They also respond to endurance training the same as men. The only difference here is that men do have more significant responses, either due to puberty that they went through that we didn't, that had that testosterone boost that gives you guys denser bones and muscles and more of that powerful type baseline that we just don't have. But there's psychosocial differences there where women weren't training in high school like me, right? I have a better lifetime start than most women because I started doing that at 13. Most of them start doing that. A lot of boys do. So you have stuff like that potentially driving some of these choices. But overall, it doesn't really change. Like if a woman wants to get stronger, they're going to follow progressive overload. Mechanical tension works for them. That's not any different. And if there is an advantage of having estrogen for recoverability and contractility and all this stuff, great. And the client can handle more volume. And if a client you have can handle more volume, male or female, you give them more volume so they can keep adapting. Like it's still the basic fundamental principle. But then we have over here, hormonal and menstrual cycle or menopausal type effects. Like that's where like the hormone conversation is. And that is grouped into women's fitness. But the question there is, do these meaningfully impact changes or decisions we make either across the month or across the lifespan? And largely, the Cliff Notes version is not really. Caveat, adjusting for the person and their experience in front of you. The protocols themselves don't change, but we can adjust or modify them based off some things that are impacted and or things that the individual is perceiving, whether that's physiologically impacting their performance or not. And people hate this. It's not sexy. They don't want, they want you to say, do this in this week. But menstrual cycles are so variable. Perimenopausal transition experience is so variable that autoregulation is usually what coaches come to. And that's not a cop out. It's that it also captures the adjustments that you would need anyway. So say of the 5 studies that we have that are kind of okay-ish on menstrual cycle phase resistance training adaptations. About half of them show that there's a difference, half of them don't. The lifting protocol intervention ones aren't the best protocols. Like you kind of have to tease apart the data. Say it does, say it's true. Say the follicular phase is better for hypertrophy and strength. Say that becomes true. We find that in literature over time. Right now, if you auto-regulate it across your cycle, meaning that you adjust based off rating of perceived exertion, your effort out of 10, and you feel fantastic the first half of your cycle, and you push harder, you do more weight, or you increase sets or reps or whatever, you're increasing volume and you're increasing effort. Guess what? You're doing more in that cycle. And say you feel super crummy in your luteal phase, it really impacts your training, and you pull back RPE, maybe you adjust reps or sets, you do 2 sets versus 3, or you pull back the total light load. Guess what? You're indirectly reducing volume and intensity and adjusting for you anyway. This accounts for these differences, even if, if that makes sense. Like people think, oh, you're just adjusting, that's a cop-out. No, auto-regulation is a way of adjusting intensity, volume, and or frequency, right? It's not just do it easy or don't. It's still the same thing, but you're adjusting those main variables of training. And so we don't really see super meaningful outputs in strength or hypertrophy or any of this stuff. Really, it's kind of murky. Maybe it's better in the follicular phase. The data, it's like kind of one of those things where it's like, but like without getting into too many nuanced details, the studies are okay, but they're not like these compelling stories that like make me be like, oh yeah, totally, that's absolutely happening. And then the performance stuff is all over, right? So really you probably can perform well at any point in the cycle. What we do see though are a few things that women can take away from this that like might be happening. One, perception is most likely what's being altered, not your physiological output. But perception doesn't mean that your feeling of it impacting you isn't invalid. I don't want to be like, oh, it's all in your head. You're the crazy whiny lady. Like I'm not paying that narrative. But we do have a few cool studies where they control hormones versus the actual like parameters of output of what they're looking at, strength, counter movement, jump, all of these things they measure in studies. versus perception of like pain, motivation, enjoyment, things like that. And what they see is that the hormones are more directly related to their perception than their performance. And I think that it's why you get a lot of pushback online, because women are like, well, I feel weaker in this phase. I feel weaker during this week. I feel it. I notice it. But the cause of that isn't necessarily, oh, like your luteal phase is blunting muscle like force output. It's your perception of pain or relative tolerance of how that workout feels might feel harder. And that's okay to adjust for perception as well. And so that's where I think the influencer thing comes in. Because if I go online and say, hey, you feel weaker here, well, that's because you're not training around your cycle kind of thing. Rather than, hey, you're perceiving it, that's not invalid, just adjust and make it work for you and how you feel. That might be happening. And that tends to happen. Self-reported data in women and in these studies, typically it's late luteal phase into early menstrual phase. And it is heavily, heavily, heavily associated with people's PMS symptoms. More PMS symptoms, PMDD symptoms, or anything like tied to menstrual cycle irregularities like that are more heavily associated with reported perception, or even like exercise impacts perception. So like the menstrual cycle does impact performance through symptoms and or perception of those symptoms and their discomfort. So it's not that women who have really bad cramps or feel like their menstrual cycle hormonal fluctuations mentally really affect them, or they have clinical conditions like PMDD. It's not to say like, wow, you're a wimp because you can't squat 2 days before your cycle starts. It's not that at all. It's that, well, your muscles might still be able to perform, but that's okay that you can't. Let's adjust for that. Let's measure that. Let's track that. Let's actually see, when do the days do you feel worse? How do we adjust your training to work for you so you can maintain a consistent pattern and consistent style of training that isn't week 1, complete rest. Week 2, hit boot camp, like ovulation or bust, do 1 rep max, counter movement, jump test, blah, blah, blah. Luteal phase, Pilates. Week before your period, rest again. Like instead of that approach, right? Or whatever the cycle syncing people are saying nowadays, it's, hey, maybe you're ebbing and flowing to where you feel best. Because here's the reality. Women's cycles are different person to person. Some people have really long follicular phases, and good for them. Some people have shorter follicular phases, and their luteal phases are more consistent. They're more stable. The follicular phase is the one that's more variable in length, which can impact if someone has a 21-day cycle, a 28-day cycle, a 35-day cycle. When is ovulation happening? Because it's not on day 14 for everyone. So telling everyone to do really hard for 2 weeks and really easy for 2 weeks doesn't make sense, when some people might be ovulating on day 20, some people might be ovulating on day 8. There's so much variability. Honestly, Lauren's has a great paper that outlines this, right? And so, that's where this falls apart. But women want to be told you're different, you're unique as a group. And then when we say you're unique as you, they're like angry about it. And you're like, no, we're saying that like this is based on you and your experience, because the reality is in exercise science, I think we will learn more as we control more for actual studies, menstrual cycle patterns of individual people and individual response. Because if you actually, I did one of my dissertation studies, some studies do this, some don't. If you like force plot out someone's change from cycle to cycle, like if you say there's 2 little graphs here, one's follicular phase, one's luteal phase, and you have someone's dot of their like performance outcome or metric from one phase to the other, you're going to see like crazy patterns. Some people might stay the same, some people might improve, some people might decrease, but there's probably a pattern there that we could outline over time of like who are like the negative responders to the menstrual cycles influences versus who's aren't, and what's going on there. Right now, it's probably menstrual cycles, symptoms, PMS, PMDD, things like that, sensitivity to that. I don't know. This again, hypothesis. But it's right now, the best thing that we can do is individually figure out what's going on for you. Now, there are some things potentially that are actually related more to like the cardiovascular response to exercise. And I did just publish a paper on this. I did it with HIIT, but in general, like I'm just saying this because like I dug into the data on this very recently to get that out, is that there might be impacts on things like thermoregulation, heart rate. So if you're doing a cardio session, it might feel a little harder in the luteal phase because you might not be able to like thermoregulate as well. You might want to increase hydration or like electrolyte protocols if you're sweating more and losing more of that, especially during like endurance type events. And or you might just need to adjust, like we do RPE with lifting, same thing for zones or RPE with that. if you're doing a zone 2 cardio day and your normal effort feels harder, like your heart rate's higher, maybe you're in zone 3 or 4, you can just pull that effort or intensity back to account for that fluctuation variation in your physiology that day within this, which means this also might impact things like sleep. So sleep might be impacted in the luteal phase, which poor sleep or poor sleep consistency or it being broken up, or you're hot in your sleep so you're not sleeping well because you're not regulating as well, might then impact performance or perception the next day of how you feel because you're more fatigued, or recovery might feel lower because of that. Again, women aren't just their hormones. They're the interactions of all these systems of things going on together that dictate and influence these things. And so some women might feel those things where some women might not feel bad at all. There might be acute fluctuations in like macronutrient reliance across the cycle. So you might be like, need more carbs in the follicular phase and maybe not as much the luteal phase, but want to make sure you time it around your workouts. Like there's some of these nuances here that are like, again, really acute. Like when we think about it, like the broad sweeping claims here aren't really like these crazy changes or anything like that. Usually what I tell women is that, you know, you may have a higher metabolism in your luteal phase and, or you may reduce like the negative impacts of your cycle on performance by eating carbs. So maybe bump up your calories a little bit and bump up your carbs around your workouts or during if you're doing long endurance event stuff and see how you feel. And guess what? If you feel better, great. We found a way for you to, with lifestyle, reduce the symptom burden and continue to do what you were doing anyway. And you might feel better. I do have a lot of women on Instagram who say, hey, I just started eating a little bit more in this phase, or started eating a little more carbs around my workouts, and all of the symptom burden that I had went away. We don't have a ton of studies on this, but we do have ones that show that like performance that was decreased in the luteal phase, this is like cycling trials, when they ate or ingested carbohydrate before or during that, like goes to normal kind of thing. So play with nutrition first with that kind of stuff. Most stuff can kind of be consistent. Like there's some nuances there. But again, they're not like these huge, like, oh my God, you need to track it and change it every single day of the week. It's like, hey, if you're in your follicular phase, maybe you might need a little bit more carbs to support performance, especially if you're feeling like hypoglycemic or really hangry or like lightheaded, like bump up your carbs. And if you're having negative performance impacts in your luteal phase, maybe eat a little bit more calories. I'm talking like 100 to 300 calories a day, nothing crazy. The data is like 2 to 12%, if at all, is basically the conclusion there. And then maybe increase its timing around your workouts and see if that helps any negative impacts on performance kind of thing. So like there are these little things, but like, as you can see, they're not these big, sexy, concrete, hardcore. It's a lot of, if you feel this way, then do this. If you don't, keep doing what you're doing. But the overall pattern of behavior doesn't largely change like week to week or phase to phase or cycle to cycle or anything like that.
I mean, geez, I felt like a university level course on the topic. So everybody listening, like, this is why I bring you on. Like, boy, fire hose of info, right? And obviously your media is good.
I know I'm trying to be quick right now because I know we're short on time, but hopefully that like everybody can just ingest that and take that for what it is.
Take a big deep breath, go back to your media and consume it. There's definitely one more thing I wanted to ask you with the time we have. So I remember a while back, there was some shitstorm. I'm not going to name names. So there's a strength coach that posted something, and I can't remember the exact, and I think it's important to get the exact right claim, but I've seen industry figures effectively claim that higher intensity lifting works in place of and creates the adaptations that we would normally attribute to longer duration, steady cardio like zone 2. So what's the flaw in that claim?
Yeah. So I am very heavily hard in my biased stance that lifting and cardio adaptations are not the same. They are not the same. And that's a good thing that they're not the same. That does not mean that we don't have some heart or cardiovascular benefits from resistance training. We do. There is an overlap between both of those on both symptoms. Just like if like a very, very, very sedentary person started doing the Stairmaster or cycling or like hill walking, they're probably going to gain a little muscle, right?
Important, forgive the interruption, but important piece to add in here. A lot of this is rooted in the elevation of heart rate and the so do you want to explain why people will take heart rate changes and misapply it? Thank you.
Yes, yes. So I was kind of giving that example of like, we could take the same flawed thinking and apply it to like cardio makes you gain muscle. Every strength coach in the industry is going to be like, no, that's dumb. You got to lift. And then whenever it comes to cardio and you say exactly what you're saying there, a high heart rate isn't cardio, they go, yeah, it is. That's wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. Mostly my YouTube comments is what that is. But like, but like they are really, really missing this systemic stress that cardiovascular activity uniquely has on the heart. And the part that everybody forgets, cardio is not just a high heart rate. It is an increase of oxygen delivery, demand, and uptake from the vascular system, from the heart and the lungs to the muscle tissue and the mitochondria within your muscle tissue. They always forget that there is a muscular component of cardiovascular training. Yes, there is cardiac remodeling. Yes, there is an adaptation at your heart, but the adaptations of the heart are different between resistance training and cardiovascular training as well. There's different types of like cardiac essentially hypertrophy or tissue adaptations that come from those things. The lifting ones are largely coming from increased strain and blood pressure and like that like Valsalva and that bracing and breathing that you're doing on your vascular system and your heart. Good, amazing. We want to use our vascular system. We want to use our hearts. That's amazing. That doesn't mean that they're bad. And it doesn't mean that there's no positive benefits on mitochondria from lifting. Our bodies don't work in silos, right? But the pathways that are stimulated and stressed from lifting to resistance training at the muscular level are also completely uniquely different. And that's a good thing. That is why everyone says cardio kills your gains, right? That comes from the fact that there's these two different pathways and they technically like interfere at a molecular level. Not really as much as people think, but that's where that comes from. So if you're going to have the claim that cardio kills gains, then you also fundamentally cannot have the claim that a high heart rate is cardio, because then you are completely merging two systems together and contradicting your own take, or just revealing. My favorite thing is just telling coaches they're revealing that they don't understand exercise science. They don't like that comeback when I say that they fundamentally don't understand the thing that they're talking about. But we can all learn. So at the muscular level, again, heart and lungs pumping out blood to be delivered to your muscular level. There's cardiac remodeling at your heart to make it thicker. You're able to pump out more blood and deliver more oxygen per beats per minute. That's a really good positive adaptation at the heart. But then at the muscular level, we have this increase in capillary density to deliver and uptake that into the tissue. And then also mitochondrial density and number, and then just general efficiency of this, which positively influences metabolism and or your ability to rely on fat oxidation more or switch from fat to carbs more efficiently as you need to with energy shifts. A high heart rate alone does not reflect that stress and strain that is happening at that whole entire systemic level. It is an artificially increased response to bracing, breathing, blood pressure, anticipation, or there's this term called decoupled, which means that your heart rate is artificially higher than the VO2 max demands or oxygen delivery demands on your body. Classic XPhys on X and Y graph, heart rate and VO2 max, straight, perfect, pretty little picture line. Obviously, not exactly, but like you can plot heart rate to VO2 max pretty linearly, which is why we can use zones and classify those out from there, because it has this nice, pretty relationship. When you're doing something like a Metcon or a Hyrox workout or a lifting session or a kettlebell swinging circuit or things like that, it doesn't mean that there's zero cardiovascular strain and activity. There's going to be some, but the heart rate that you have is going to be decoupled, which is a fancy way of saying artificially inflated compared to the physiological strain that is actually required of that at that like aerobic training level. So in really lay terms, your heart rate might be at 80% of your max heart rate during a lift. One, it might be because you have a really low cardiovascular fitness and you need to do more cardio. Or two, it's that because it's just hard, you're doing something hard, but the VO2 max demands of that exercise might only be 30% or something like that. They aren't exactly the same, where when you're doing cardio under like, stable controlled conditions, if your heart rate's at like 80% of your max heart rate, you're probably working around 80% of your VO2 max, give or take, things like that. So it's a little bit more related and directional and directly tied to that. So that doesn't mean that you're having the same physiological demands and asks of your body just because your heart rate is high. Is it good to get your heart rate elevated? Yes. But is it the same exact thing? No. There's my cliff.
This episode is brought to you by Just Bite Me Meals. I work long days and I won't compromise my client experience or sacrifice my workout, sleep, or nutrition. So I needed a quality and reliable meal prep service so I could save time on cooking and shopping and have more time for the stuff that matters. Net out the cost of groceries and the service isn't as much as you might think, and regular impulsive food delivery apps, eating out, that costs way more anyway. I get more meal variety and less dishes to clean, and I've been referring clients to Just Bite Me Meals for a long time, and I recently started ordering myself. Food is great. The beef brisket tacos are my favorite so far, and there's a lot of menu choice. Your calories and macros are listed. The portions are great. You can order custom meals. They deliver to your door, or you can pick up from their storefront. And I'm sorry to listeners outside of Alberta, but Just Bite Me Meals is currently just in Edmonton, Calgary, Grand Prairie, and Fort McMurray. Ordering from Just Bite Me Meals made my life easier instantly. And you can get 10% off on all your orders using my code, Andrew Coates Fitness, all caps, on their website. That's Andrew Coates Fitness, all capitals, or go to the link and the code in the show notes. That's fantastic. So we definitely know that someone who's straight training is going to have massive net improvements in long-term metabolic health risks. We know that it's good for blood pressure. We know that's good for blood sugar regulation. But let's say that person who religiously strength trains, gets their heart rate elevated through strength training, as you just described, but they're doing next to no cardio, zone 2 or more intense modalities. What are the risks? What are the benefits they're not getting to their metabolic health long term?
Yeah. So, muscle's having a moment and I love it. I never want my cardio message to seem anti-muscle, but everyone's like, muscle is metabolism and metabolic health. And that isn't false. It is true. We want that. But it's like buying a really, really, really fancy sports car that looks really good, but then putting an engine in it of a Honda Civic, like a beat down 1998 Honda Civic, right? So like you're not, my approach is like build the machinery build the muscle through resistance training, but build the engine through cardiovascular training. And by that I mean building the capillary networks, the mitochondrial density and or capacity of that, which will directly and positively influence your metabolic health and or cardiovascular disease. It's a different type of strain and stressor to have that kind of consistent blood flow pumping at that more regular rate through your heart and your vascular system. And then obviously the demands the muscular level because it's stimulating a completely different pathway, which with completely different signaling mechanisms that are telling you to increase these things like fat oxidation, metabolic flexibility, metabolic capacity, how you regulate the food that you eat or exercise and all of that stuff. And you are leaving all of that on the table by not developing, again, like the engine of the car that you're building. And people really, again, this to my point of like muscles having a moment, we have so much data that cardiovascular fitness status is so directly tied to long-term health, longevity, morbidity, the fancy word of saying likelihood of dying, cardiovascular disease risk, metabolic disease risk. Like having an elevated cardiovascular fitness status is one of the most incredibly protective mechanisms of your long-term health and well-being and longevity. Now, VO2 max is often tossed around for that. It's just an easy way for people to assess these things in a lab. It just means people with a higher general fitness status or capacity, because all VO2 max is a reflection of your body's ability to do all the things that I was describing earlier in an efficient way kind of thing, but just get fitter across the board. And the magnitude of what you have to like even get fitter to start to like reap these benefits isn't ton. Going from like very, very poorly aerobically fit to like low aerobic fitness gets you like a significant part of the way there, right? Even the exercise guidelines, like getting just to that like 150 minutes of moderate intensity per week, that's a basement, not a ceiling. I think a lot of people forget that. That's not to say to people like if you're not doing more than that, you're bad, but that's where you get like a huge significant jump in the health outcomes and benefits. And then more from there, you do increase it. But like that little bit of that jump from like 0 to 150 minutes per week is the most significant jump. And then everything else from there, it's almost like a J-shaped curve. It's more gradual, but it's still improving. And so you don't have to be an elite marathoner if you don't want to be kind of thing. as fitness improves, like there's like less return on investment kind of thing, but you're missing out on all of those benefits. So it's not like lifting alone isn't healthy for you, isn't good. But I tell people, like, if they really hate lifting or they hate cardio, or they're in that club of like, I only walk and do lifting kind of thing. I'm like, just do like 1 or 2 days of like higher intensity cardio per week to sprinkle in some of that within that, because for some people walking might be intense enough. A lot, if it is, that's fine. For some people it might not be. Like, there's a lot of nuance there we talked about in the first episode. But it's just not the same. And you're I don't want to scare people, but like, you're kind of just completely neglecting an entire component of your health and fitness. And so you're leaving a lot of that benefit from that cardiometabolic standpoint or performance standpoint on the table, and just a different stress and stimulus for those pathways. So I don't have like concrete, you know what I mean, like hard numbers of like what you're doing, but like when we look at the benefits of resistance training and cardio, yes, resistance training benefits these cardio things, but it is not to the same magnitude as aerobic training does. And that's where people miss out. They're like, well, it improves it, yes, but not to the same amount, right? And so if you want the bang for your buck on actually doing these things to capacity that significantly is improving health outcomes, you have to do it. I get it's hard, I get it's boring, but a high heart rate is not, or doesn't make something cardio alone.
Fantastic. The thing you said about VO2 max, I've often thought of, people get obsessed with trying to improve their VO2 max. I think about it like grip strength. People talk about grip strength being this like thing that has a relation with longevity. It's, if you try to train grip strength to improve your longevity, you try to train VO2 max directly. I think you're missing the point. These are metrics that are reflections of all these other healthy things that you're doing. So they're better looked at as measures, not the thing that you're chasing. And the second thing I was going to say is, talk about Honda Civics. And then I'm a Fast and Furious junkie. So anybody who doesn't know Fast and Furious, this reference will be entirely lost on you, but they were running Honda Civics as the performance vehicles in the robberies. And then Hector was running 3 Honda Civics. So anyway, people can have their fun and run with that. If they don't get the reference, I apologize. Everybody can follow you at Doc Liss Fitness on Instagram. I definitely want them to go check out what you're doing if they're not already. Anything else you want to point people to right now?
No, I would just say Instagram, YouTube, lots to learn, lots to come, I'm trying to work to be more consistent about releasing more female physiology information. I have been doing a lot more this fall. I'll be doing a lot more into this next year. Kind of had to take a pause to focus on the whole growing your business thing. But I'm back with a vengeance. So I'm here to help. So mostly Instagram, YouTube, that's the best place to find me.
You're doing amazing things. And I'll just say this. Everybody just keep your eyes on what you're doing, because Alyssa, you have been taking the industry by storm the last few years. And I know you're going to be doing big things. So guys, stay tuned. You're going to see some really cool stuff coming up. Thanks for tuning in and listening. This again is one of those episodes where I hope these resources are so valuable that you'll take this and go, hey, I know this coach. I know this person. You'll put in their DMs, share with them. It helps me grow this podcast and reach more people. Thank you guys.